Hi, Seth here with BlenderSensei.com. Today we're taking a look at an awesome free add-on that comes shipped with Blender called Measureit. To activate it, we can go to Edit, Preferences, click the Add-ons tab, and find it in this list here. We'll just check that. You can click this button here if you want to see a little bit more information about the add-on, such as its location, which is in the sidebar of the Properties panel over here under the View tab. All right, so I'll close up this default menu here, and if we come down, we can see here it is, Measureit Tools. Cool. Let's go ahead and X out the user preferences, and I'm going to go ahead and move this to the top so we can make this our main focus today. This is an add-on that brings a lot of badly needed CAD functionality to Blender. Maybe not badly needed, but for people who don't want to bother learning expensive or cumbersome CAD software, who just want to stick with Blender, but need some functionality, this is an awesome tool. From the top here, we have these show buttons, which will hide or show all of the measurements that you make across your whole file. One thing that's a little bit annoying about this is that you'll have to press this before you use the add-on every single time. Your actual measurements that you make will save with your file when you save your file. However, to begin the whole production of displaying everything, you have to press this button. But it is nice to be able to hide everything as well if you don't want to see all the measurements you make. You'll notice that a lot of these items are grayed out. These items become usable once you are in edit mode. That includes this little area button down here. And we'll get into these object mode options in a minute here, but for now, let's hit tab and go into edit mode and make a measurement. So the first option we have here is segment. And by segment, the add-on means, hey, pick one vertex point, then pick another one, and then that will be a segment. So we could switch to vertex selection mode here. I used a hotkey, but we'll click one point, shift click another one. So we've got 2 points selected. We press segment. Lo and behold, we have a measurement. In addition to our measurement now being drawn, we now have a whole new menu item here called items. Let's kind of break this down a little bit so we don't get confused as to what these items are. So this first big box here under items is not an item. These are settings for our items, which are displaying here. There's actually currently one item, or one measure if you want to call it that, displaying here. We can do things like change its color. So maybe make it white to be a bit more readable. And we have an additional settings here. We can change the font size, make it bigger, smaller. We can rotate this value. We can adjust the items which are composing the ends of the measurement. We can change these to triangle, triangle on the left, triangle on the right, or whatever. Switch these back to default. If for some reason we don't want to display the distance, we can turn that off. We can change the line width. One of the most awesome things about this add-on is that these values are calculated dynamically. As you can see, if we take a top look at the grid and zoom out a little bit, you can see this is exactly 2 meters because that's what this grid is set to. But if we move this, we'll see this line is calculated perfectly. So what these values below here do is allow you to only update based on the axes, whichever axes you select. So if we uncheck X and Y, for example, you see it says Z there now, and this is only going to, if I move this along the X axis here, notice this value isn't updating. It's only going to update when we go up and down. Incredible granularity here. Okay, I'm going to click those back so that we get a regular, always tell me the right measurement between these 2 points situation going on here. So just to be clear about the segments, you can set a segment up between any 2 vertex points. It doesn't just have to be an edge like this. So to make that clear, I'm going to switch to face, and I'm going to extrude this a few times. And then we could extrude this out. I could say I wanted a dynamic measurement between here and here all the time. Just select this point, and I shift select this one over here, click segment, and now I have another segment here that will always update the length here. So since I added that new segment there, if we come down into the item section, remember this is not any of the items. This is a menu thing. For some reason, my brain gets a little confused by that. And let's go ahead and close up these settings on this measurement that we had made. And you can see that there are two items here now. We can, of course, individually hide and display these values, or we could delete them by pressing X if we wanted to. Another super awesome feature is that you can label these measurements whatever you want, and that's what this little provided box is here for. It's not just space. It actually has awesome functionality. Say this was going to be, I don't know, the door entrance of something. We could just type door. And why isn't it displaying? Let's open this up. Oh, because I don't have text checked. All right, so this value isn't checked by default. If we click this, then whatever notes we add here will display. I don't know, in our little fantasy design here, what does this represent? Like some kind of like heating pipe distance? Like maybe that's how much we'll need, material we'll need between that point and that point. So we can close that one up and we'll call this, oh, we'll just call it pipeline. There we go. And then now, no matter how this changes, we'll always know how long that needs to be. I think in general that as far as this default color scheme goes, this light blue is a little difficult to see, but I don't want to have to come and change these colors every single time. So I've got two options. The first option is that, and we'll change this to something else so we can see how this works. But the first option is that I can override all the colors by pressing this button, and this will override all of my measurements to a single color, which is nice. The only issue here is, say that I mostly want everything to be white like this, and along with these other overridden settings like the font size, the width or whatever, the lines, the rotation. Say I want this for most things, but I don't want it on everything to be like that. So say I want, I don't know, door entrances to always be red, but I want most everything to be white because it's visible, then this wouldn't allow me to do that because it overrides everything. So our other option, this is the like quick and easy option if you just need something for consistent colors and don't want to worry about it. But the other option that would give you a little bit more control down the line, say you're in a situation where you wanted mostly everything to be one color, but you still wanted to have specific control for, say, just windows or heating, where heating pipes go in your design, you can disable override, and then you can adjust this configuration menu. So we'll close up items for a second. And so here we can configure how we want default things to be created. So this will not change everything that we've already set up, but from henceforth, whatever we create after will follow these rules of the configuration. So we could change this to white, and everything else is basically fine. I just want that color to be changed. Okay, so now that we've changed that default color, everything we create from here on out will be that color. So I'll select 2 points, press segment, and there my measurement is made. I'm going to go ahead and click back on items and delete our pipeline. Okay, so I'm going to close the options for that item. And what would we say? That is the west wing. We'll call that west wing. We already covered what these do. We can hide the distances if we just wanted to see the labels that we added to these things, or we can hide those as well if we don't want to see either of those. We can change the units of measurement from meters to centimeters to feet, or you could leave this on automatic, which means this value will be fed from your scene preferences, which you can access those in the scene tab of the properties panel under units here. See if we switch this to imperial, see that happens, and then back there. The configuration here, this is something I believe that you can set up, like, you know, you could set up the default font size, color, etc. And then you could save that with your default startup file. So you don't have to come and press override every time just to have your preferred color of measurement show up whenever you start a new file. So keep that in mind if you are looking to set up some defaults here. Okay, so we have expand all, which will expand all of the options. And then obviously collapse all, which will do the inverse of that. We can close up our configuration menu here. So I'm not quite sure why I made this so wide. I'm going to make it a little less wide. So this sum feature will do something really cool. It will allow us to make measurements across multiple walls and then also keep track of them. So like a second ago, we set up a measurement between here to here for our imaginary pipeline that we wanted to keep track of how much material we would need for it or something. But what if we had a much more complicated measurement to make? I'm going to go ahead and let's extrude this crazy, whatever this, are we making a building? I don't know, it's something crazy. But say you want to keep track of the measurement of this entire side of the wall here, you could do so. You could switch to vertex selection, and I'm going to Alt select, and then Alt Shift select these lines. Whoops, didn't need to select that, deselect this stuff. Maybe we'll just go ahead and select all that there. Okay, escape. Right. Okay, if I go into wireframe, take a look, make sure I don't have anything selected I don't want. So I just want these bottom points down here selected because we're going to keep track of this measurement. So with this sum feature, what we can do is choose a group basically. They're just arbitrarily named after letters of the alphabet. These names don't really mean anything. The point is that there's 26 groups. So we'll pick group D, and all we have to do now that we have all these selected, and I'm going to go ahead and switch back to solid viewport shading, is press segment. Now we have all of these segments added here across all of these lines. But since we chose a group, if we come down here, we have a new menu here that says group D. This lists off the sum of those values. So now, however our building or whatever changes, these values are always going to be added together, and we'll know exactly the length of this. I guess this brings us to another use case for the configuration. Before we created all those segments simultaneously, it might have been useful to choose the default font size and color and everything for just that measurement, because it's like a lot of stuff and you probably want it differentiated from your other measurements. Okay, so I'm going to close that configuration, and I'm going to go ahead and press this button, which will delete everything we've made thus far. Okay, so this X, Y, and Z value here, while we're in edit mode, these are not options that I think you'll be using too often. So what this will do is create measurements from any one vertex point from the object's origin. So this object's origin is actually at the dead center of the grid here. But to make this point more clear, let's go back into object mode and move it over here. So you can see that this object's origin point, this little orange dot, is right here right now. So we go press tab to go back into edit mode. So up until this point, we've been selecting any 2 points to generate our segment measurement. But these X, Y, and Z options here, this will generate a measurement from any one vertex point to the object's origin point. So if I press X here, notice that this goes out all the way to where the origin point is here, and this gives us an X value from the origin point. I mean, I'm sure there's some good reason for this. I just can't think of it right now. If we added a Y measurement, this gives us the Y distance away from the origin point, as you can see there. Z, which is right here. See those line up there. And so yeah, that's basically what that's for. So for me, the uses are mostly going to be with this segment button while in edit mode anyway, and the angle and arc, which we'll get into those in a second. Speaking of angle, you can easily measure angles here with the Measureit tool. You just have to select any 3 points or vertex points instead of 2, and then you press angle, and we will get an angle readout of the 3 points that you selected. Once again, this is all dynamic. So these values will always update and give us real-time feedback, which is so cool. We can also create arcs. So Same thing, you have to select 3 vertex points, press arc, and this will give us data on the arc. There's some cool options for the arc as well. I believe that was the last thing we created, so it should be this item here. So we'll click open its options, and we can change which values are displayed with this arc. We can choose to draw the full circle of the arc. We can also set individual labels for each of these values. Say whatever. Up till now, we've been adding measurements with labels, but you can also just add a label if you don't want to involve a measurement in the situation at all. So just select whatever vertex point where you want a label to be, and then press label. I'm going to close up the settings for that arc we had. And now you can see the last item we created was that label. You can quickly verify that, of course, by enabling and disabling it. And so there's the little line sticking out of the vertex point where we created label. So now we just have to call it something guest room. Okay, that's the guest room. So that's useful. Then we can measure areas. To measure an area, you can switch to face mode, select one or multiple faces, press area, and you'll get a dynamically updated area value of whatever faces you selected. It also fills in that area with a custom color, so you can change this color value of the area, which is super, super useful, super thoughtful. This color is for the area itself. This has got to be for the, not for the text. What is that color control? Oh, it does control the text. It just wasn't showing up. Okay. So we can set the text color with this one and the area color here. All right, so we're getting a little cluttered here. I'm going to go ahead and delete that group measurement data that we did earlier because we don't really need that anymore. And let's scroll back up. So just a few other things to mention regarding the items, which I kind of wonder if this items should have been called measures, because here we're talking about measures as like they're nouns. It's a measure, and that's what this is for. So, I mean, I guess items is fine, but okay, so we have this precision value. This just controls how many zeros you want to add after the decimal point of your float values here. So we could change it to whole numbers if we wanted. And combined with switching this to feet and whole numbers, now I definitely feel like I'm designing a treehouse for some reason. But we'll switch that back to 2 decimal places there. And back to meters. We can hide the measurement units altogether, which is nice. And we can also scale up all of our measurement values as well. If we press this, this will display at what ratio all of our measurements are being displayed. Say you were designing something that was massive or a skyscraper or whatever, you don't want to have to actually make it super massive in the 3D view. You can use this scale value to model the thing at a reasonable size here in the 3D view, but then have measurements that represent the massive, massive thing. So you can just scale up your measurements like this, get it up to Statue of Liberty size or whatever. And of course we can adjust its color. All right, let's delete all of our measurements. Get a nice clean UI here again. And before we exit edit mode, let's take a look at the mesh debug menu, which is really neat. I think who benefits the most from this mesh debug menu is probably add-on developers, but also people dealing with really complex scenes and rendering and stuff, pipeline managers and stuff like that, I'm sure. So we have this object scene index value, which will show basically which object exists in the data array of objects. We only have one object, or well, we have several objects here. Forgot about good old camera and Mr. Light there. It shows the scene index of objects. That's cool. This shows the index array of vertex points. And this is exactly the kind of thing that you need when you're creating add-ons that adjust mesh. You're always looking for this data, so that's super helpful. We can change the readout of this data to selected, so only selected things will show up using the circle brush here. And of course, we can control the font size and precision as well. Of course, these are all whole numbers because this is just an index of vertex points. That is to say, these are not the coordinates of the vertex points. These are this this is the list, the position of the vertex points in an array of the data. And the same for edges and the same for faces. This is really useful debug info to get quick feedback. The normals display, this is something that will be useful to anyone because oftentimes, let's hide the details here. Oftentimes you can have issues with your mesh where like something looks weird, or it's like rendering with a weird dark shadow it's not supposed to have or something. And that can be because your mesh is normal. That is, a normal just means which direction a polygon is facing. That's what the normal means. And sometimes that can get hidden within your mesh, especially when you have really complicated mesh. So this lets you know which direction it's facing, so you could, fix something weird that was like rendering weird or something like that. We can control the length, thickness, and so on. So I was talking about how these different mesh data buttons just display information regarding the location of that mesh item within the data, within the index of its array. But you can also display the actual XYZ location values of individual objects and vertex points. So if we turn that off and click objects and then location, we get the XYZ value of the actual location of the object. So we go into object mode and then move this around. You can see that those values update live. We go back into edit mode, turn on vertices, turn these off, turn on location. We'll get individual location values for each vertex point. You can see that changes as I move the vertex point. And this, of course, gets a lot more useful when we enable selection as well. And maybe change this color here. And that's extremely useful. All right, so that about does it for the edit mode tools in the Measureit add-on. Let's take a look at what's available in object mode. The object mode features are pretty similar to the edit mode features of Measureit, just a bit scaled back. So we have the option for annotation here. That's similar to label, except for when we make an annotation, it's like a label that can just live wherever it wants. So let's press annotation, and then similar to how as soon as we made something in this top menu, we had an items menu added in the edit mode, same thing for an object mode here. And here is our single item that we just made, which was an annotation. To make our annotation say something, we could click on it and make it say something. That created an empty, as you can see up here in the outliner. If you wanted that to be attached to an object, of course, you could just parent it. So like say you wanted this to be attached to this lamp for some reason, you could shift select the lamp, Control P, set parent to object. And then now when we move the camera around, we have our little annotation move around, which is useful. So link performs a similar function as the measure tool, except for, once again, it's dynamic. So let's add two objects here. We'll add Suzanne and a Taurus. If we shift select two objects and press link, this will give us a measurement between their two origin points. Alternatively, and of course, like everything else, this updates dynamically. Alternatively, you can select a specific vertex point on each object before you press link, and it will form the measurement between those 2 points. Say I duplicated this, and I wanted to know, not what's the distance between this origin point and this origin point, but I wanted to always know what's the distance between these two buildings in terms of this wall and this wall. You could select a vertex point here, go into edit mode into this other one, select a vertex point there, select these two, press link, and that measurement is made exactly at the vertex points you selected. And you've got this dynamically updating measurement between these two things, which that rules. And so finally, as far as the object options go, we have origin, which will just create a measurement between the origin point of the scene, which is where the X and Y lines cross, and whatever objects you have selected. So if we press origin, we'll get a measurement from there to actually where I had that vertex point selected. So if I wanted this to be from origin of the grid to origin of whatever object, we would just make sure that we didn't have any vertex points selected, and we could delete that last measurement we made, press origin again, and now it's from origin to origin, updating dynamically, of course. Awesome. Okay, so the last thing to talk about is the render section. So what this will do is allow you to render your scene wherein your measurement lines and numbers and things are captured. Otherwise, if you were to, let's split this open. Let's go into camera view, and lock camera to view. So we can move this around. So say you were to press F12 to render that. Notice none of our lines show up. However, if we render directly from this menu button here, our measurements will show up. So if we press render, and then we could split this open again and take a look at the image editor here, switch this to Measureit output, which is different from the regular render result there. We'll see our measurements. So we've got this option here, which I'm not really sure what this does. It says save an image with measures over the render image, which sounds pretty straightforward. It makes me think that this should render on top of the objects as well. However, when I check this, nothing shows up. So if we press render again, here we are on the Measureit output, and it does the same thing. Here we are on the render result, and doesn't show up there. Maybe it's only for a specific render engine. Let's try that out. Under the render engine, maybe it only likes Workbench. Who knows? Let's see. Render. Not showing up there either. So that may be a bug, but it's still cool that we can get these dimensions like this. You could, of course, easily composite this over this if you wanted to. A really cool way that you could use this, say you had a whole floor plan worked out, and actually let's go ahead and items, delete all. Well, let's delete it all for that object. Delete all for that object. So say you had a floor plan for this thing. I'm gonna go ahead and delete these other things here. And we'll go into edit mode, and we'll select all of these points. Then I will set that to vertex selection. You can see I just have all those bottom vertex points selected, and I will hit segment to create segments all around here. Then in my camera, I'm going to aim down, and I'm going to select the actual camera, head back into object mode so I can select the camera, and under type, switch this to orthographic. So now we're looking straight down here. And then I can use this orthographic value here to scale the image up. And I probably would have wanted to frame this a little bit better. I can go to view, viewpoint, top here, and then we can go to view, and then align active camera to view. So now we have a perfectly looking down view here. Click back on the object so we have access to all of the object's items, or measures if you will, which is quite a bunch. And click override so we can quickly control all of these values here, make this something much smaller, and turn off hide measurements so we can see that it's meters. Then we could press the render button, and look at that. We've got the beginnings of some actual blueprints. How cool is that? We could do the same thing, but from a different angle. Like, say we had the measurements on the walls and stuff. I think you kind of get the gist of what I'm saying here. Like, you could do top, back, front, etc. Blueprints this way with that render button. A little bit of work to get hammered out, but really cool nonetheless. And then you could, if you wanted, you could save this image somewhere, just press save as, and you got some blueprints. So that's going to about do it for this video. Stay tuned if you would like to listen to me read the documentation for this add-on at the end of this video. If you're just now discovering the Measureit add-on and you learned something new, please let me know down in the comments. And also like this video if you're stoked about something new you learned today, and I'll see you next time. Okay, so I'm going to read the documentation for this add-on. Probably not a lot in here that we didn't already cover in the video, but you might find it useful to let this play in the background while you're messing around with the add-on. I might inadvertently say something useful, who knows? Measureit is an add-on designed for displaying measures in the viewport, making the process of designing objects with exact measures easier. These tools are extremely useful for any job that requires exact measurements, including architectural projects, technical design, and 3D printing. Activation. Open Blender and go to Preferences, then the Add-ons tab. Click 3D View, then Measureit to enable the script. And then Interface is the big picture of some of the interface, and then Overview, located in the 3D Viewport Sidebar View tab. The Measureit Tools panel is described below. To view the measures, you need to press the Show button. Many measure styles appear grayed out in the menu. These are active in edit mode. The Mesh Debug subpanel has extra display options. The Items subpanel appears after adding a measure. This contains the color settings for each measure. The Configuration subpanel contains the font settings. The Render subpanel contains the render settings. Usage. Mesh vertex to vertex measure, length between vertices in the same mesh. Mesh vertex labeling, add a label to any mesh vertex. This allows you to identify easily different areas or objects in a scene. Object to object. Distance between object origins, vertex to origin or vertex to vertex. Object to origin. Distance between object origin to scene origin or vertex to scene origin. Allows work with different scales. The measures can be used with meshes, empties, lights, and cameras. As all measure definitions are saved in the blend file, you can save the file, and the next time you use it, the measures will be ready. And that's it. Thanks very much for watching, especially if you stuck around to the end of this video. Please subscribe if you're not subscribed, and let me know down in the comments below if you plan on using this add-on, if you think it would be helpful to you at all. If you've got some interesting ideas for use cases, stuff like that, that would be really cool to share with me and everyone else. So thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.